but it's also been the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
So, what felt hardest in your parenting?
The Lord, called me to adopt. I'll be honest, I fought the call for 4 years. Like, God, you got the wrong person. So I did like a compassion child. I did everything but, right? We always do those everything but. And then finally adopted it. And I tell you, it's been a tremendous blessing, but it's also been the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Because when you have children that come from hard places and there's a lot of trauma and things like that, it forces you to grow quickly. And thankfully, I have been in some churches, not all churches, but I've been in some churches where they understood. And I was in an interview recently, and I got emotional saying this. I never really realized this until like the interviewer asked me a question. I responded, and they said, "What's been the most significant for you when it comes to like your church experience and stuff?" And my comment was, I realized that it was significant for me when my church started treating my children like their own. That still gets me a little bit. And the reason being is that's where my children started experiencing more healing because I could not do it as a single pastor or single dad in ministry. I understand that the church is the bride of Christ, and I don't want to be the person that, quote, knocks the church, right? But I do want to say that we've got to stop doing church the way we've been doing it, because some of the things that we do are not theologically grounded. And so my heart has been not only for churches, but okay, my confession comes. The reason these books came out is I spent 30 years discipling other people's children, and I didn't know how to disciple my own kids when they came to me. And I'm a pastor, right? I'm a
Mm-hmm.
professor. I teach in the ministry leadership department at a college. And I'm like, I don't know how to disciple my own kids. And I think most parents want to disciple their kids, but they don't know how. And
Mm.
so part of the church passion that I have with that coming alongside families is I think as churches, we have to stop being so professional about discipleship. And we have to just say, hey, there are easy ways as a parent you can disciple your children. For instance, and I know churches say this, but again, I think parents, they want to do it. They don't feel equipped because they don't feel like they're a Bible scholar, right? And that's why pastors and youth pastors went to seminary and things like that. But here's what I discovered as a parent, and I want churches to apply this and get this to parents too and say, I think some parents are saying, what if my child asks a really hard theological question I don't know the answer to, right? That's what the church is for, right? I didn't go to seminary. But here's what I say. One of the best discipleship experience I've had with my children is just reading the Bible, a passage together and saying, what does that mean to you? And just letting them talk. And here's the thing that I've discovered that I had to get in my mind with being okay with is if my child asks a hard theological question, I need to be able to say the following things. Number one, that's a great observation. Number two, I don't know the answer. But number three, let's find out together. So what you've done is you have affirmed their intelligence, their desire to grow. You've shown some humility, which as parents we need to do sometimes, right? And then you've invited them with you on a spiritual discipleship journey to literally discover the answer and say, let's dig into the scripture. Let's talk to the pastor together. Let's find out whatever we can do to find the answer to your question because it's a really good one. So I think it's okay being okay with the tension of not knowing.
Yes. And you know what makes me think about like if a child is asking these questions and then you don't answer them, then it kind of blows them off in a sense. So go, well, okay, well, they didn't answer me, so I guess maybe they don't care, or I should know, or that's just a question, or how will I find the answer? So all these things the child's part is probably asking, am I right?
Sure. Well, or the worst one too is when you give them an answer like, well, you just have to have faith. Okay, we
Yeah.
know faith is important, right? But what you've done is you have and in order to avoid hard questions and hard conversations and doing a little work, what we've really done is honestly, I hate to say this, but a lot of kids grow up with unanswered questions. We don't allow them to ask questions. They get unanswered questions. And what they do is they walk away from the faith because they go, there's no depth to it, right? We had a conversation about are we taking people deeper in their faith? Are we living in the areas of discomfort and that causes us to drill down and get beyond building our house on the sand and actually build it on the rock, right?
Yeah.
Or are we just doing programs?
Yeah. We were also talking before we even got on here about, how the teenagers and maybe young adults today, they're searching
Yeah.
for truth and
Yeah.
stability, right? So talk about that.
Yeah, and we had the conversation. It's true that a lot of young adults now are going to the Catholic Church. And the reason that's being is if you look at child development, Erickson's psychosocial development, Ainsworth and Bowlby with attachment theory and stuff like that. I hate to say this, we live in a culture where we have systemically abandoned our young people. And what I mean by that is every institution that is supposed to be about the healthy nurture and development of young people has been hijacked by adult-driven agendas.
Mm,
So this is why Gen Z has been labeled the most lonely and anxious generation. Well, where Gen Z and millennial are going now, they're going to the Catholic Church because of stability. They can feel a place of belonging. There's a sense, matter of fact, the number one thing kids need is stability. They need nurture, love, stability. They need to feel like they're part of a family where they belong and they have purpose and they have meaning and they have an identity, right? The primary task of adolescence is identity formation. Well,
mm.
adolescence is being extended to age 29 now. And so these young adults are the reason they're going to these churches that feel more like tradition and family and stability is because they're looking for the stability they did not get in the culture or maybe even in their home or maybe even in their church. And so when they get that stability, they can get a sense of belonging, they get a sense of identity, and that's where they feel nurtured.
You know, I think so many kids need that stability. You're right. Maybe they're not getting it at home.
Right.
Maybe they're not getting it in their church. Maybe they feel like when they go into their church, maybe they feel like they're getting judged. I
Right.
mean, we don't even know what goes through, a child's mind, but you're right. Acceptance, belonging, that's like the major part of it. And also to know who Jesus is because again, you were talking about like head knowledge versus heart knowledge.
Right.
Let's go down that road.
Yeah, it's funny because the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is just like it, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the great commandment, right? Head, heart, hands. We're supposed to love God with all of us. But in our church, we spend so much time in programs and formal education and formal learning and sit down in small groups. And I tell people all the time, just because you go to a Bible study doesn't mean you're studying the Bible, right? And so it's interesting. So we teach primarily to the head, but there's a huge disconnect between that and the heart, right? And yet, John Cotter, who's a famous leadership guru, he says 80% of change comes from the heart. Now, we have to find a balance. We have to get the information and knowledge, but knowing how to apply it with our heart because it becomes a part of us. That's where wisdom comes in, and then actually putting hands to it, right? How do I serve? Most young people leave the church and don't own their faith because they have no ownership of their church, right? It's like we
Mhm.
magically expect that they're going to turn 18, become an adult, and all of a sudden they're taking leadership in the church, but we've done nothing to prepare them for that leadership when they were younger. At my church, I have 4 and 5 year olds that take up the offering. I have
Mhm.
young people who are serving in different ways of greeting or singing in the choir or whatever, right? And so I want to whatever an adult can do. Think about this when we're parents, we model to our kids the behaviors or the tasks that we expect them to learn how to do, right? My kids had to learn how to do their own laundry. I had to show them how to do it and model it with them, right? Why are we not doing those principles with our faith? Why are we separating wisdom and experience from energy, enthusiasm, and innovation, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So we got to start training our young people. Just like if I were in a family and I were teaching my kids how to do certain things, I'm going to model it. I'm going to do it with them, and then I expect them to do it. But we
Mhm.
don't do that. We just wait till they're 18 and expect them to do it. And kids are going, I've waited long enough to be in leadership. I don't know how to be in leadership. So I'm either going to leave the church or I'm going to go somewhere else.
Okay, so a question came in my mind is like, what if the kid doesn't have parents that believe? Now,
Yeah,
this is a child that maybe a child, young adult that just wanders into the church,
a
and
great
this is their
question.
first experience. How do you handle that?
Well, I was one of those kids. My parents did not raise me in the church. They were sort of cultural Christians, not really Christians. They had good morals and stuff, right? But what I think reason God has been doing all this in my life and through my church became my family, right? And so for kids who and I used to do ministry, like I said, we had a large youth ministry. We'd have a student ministry grew from like 30 or 40 to 700, right? And it was program based. It was great. It was attractional. But what kids were looking for, we had a lot of kids that didn't have families that go. So we tried to make sure that we became that spiritual family for them, right? And so for the kid whose parents don't go to church, I would say all the more reason why we need to be family to them, right?
Hmm.
We don't know. We might have kids that are being abused or neglected, but they come into the church and they have a spiritual parent or grandparent that nurtures them. And by the way, I don't want to just talk about youth on this. I think we go through various identity crises through our life, right? When you're kids, you're an empty nester, all of a sudden you have to redefine who you are in your identity. You're still a
Hmm.
parent, but not, it's different, right? So why not be a spiritual grandparent to young people in church, whether they have parents or not that go to church?
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
gives us purpose and meaning, and it's intergenerational. Mhm.
What's the biggest turnoff for anyone who's walking into a church, whether it's
Mm.
teens, adults, or whatever?
I think it's sort of the same thing as kind of like I got to be careful I don't do this too. Well, when I was a kid or when I was a youth or when I was a whatever, they don't want to hear that, right?
Yeah.
It's different if you have a relationship and you're just having conversations, right? That come out, you've earned that right to be heard. But they are in the midst of developing their identity. And honestly, the biggest turnoff is just again a sense of not belonging when the rules are more important than the relationship, when the programs are more important than the people, it's a turnoff.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that because, when you're walking into a church and you see, oh, they're doing all this great stuff, but does anybody care about how I feel or
Right.
where I am spiritually?
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
this is a big question, Rich.
Yeah, a lot of young people have spent a lot of years hiding their true self.
Yeah.
And I think they want to be at a place where they can be their true self, where the longer they're there, the more they can let the walls down. But
Mhm.
aren't we like that as adults?
We want people to understand us. I don't, no matter what, walking in somewhere fresh out off the street, you
Mhm.
just you just want somebody to say hello
Yes.
and just make you feel welcome there.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you're sitting, I'm going to speak out of my experience.
Please do.
I've gone into church, I've sat in the pew, and I have been ignored.
Yep.
Then I've gone to churches where I've sat down in the pew,
Mm.
and one or two people have walked over and said,
Mm.
"Hello, thank you for coming. I'm
Yeah.
glad you're here." That meant a lot because
Oh, yeah.
I thought to myself, okay, a warm church. Maybe
Yeah.
people like each other here. These are
Yeah.
the things that I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
You want
A
to
lot
speak
of it
into
really
that?
boils down to intentionality. There's not a single church in the Western world that I know of that says, "Well, we're just a mean church and we like it that way."
Yeah.
Right? Every church says, "Oh, we're a loving church, we're a welcoming church," whatever. Okay, well, show it. Well, what I mean by intentionality is this. If if you're going to say you're going to be a welcoming, warming, loving church, then the intentionality may mean because there's sometimes churches assume that somebody greeted you,
Hmm.
but it's an
Hmm.
assumption, it's not intentional. So you have to have people that are part of your church to say, hey, would you intentionally, again, doesn't matter the age, even if a fifth grader, 5-year old, 10-year old, with a 50-year old, somebody walks in and they're the official designated intentional greeters, then all that, and I don't mean it's a program. I don't mean it's you have somebody standing out the door handing out bulletins. Okay, maybe. But no, you have people in the congregation who are trained to look for the newcomer. And they're the ones that go, they have the gift of hospitality. And they're the ones that walk up to you and say, we are so glad you're here. This is my name. Who are you? Tell me about yourself, right? That's different than standing at the door with a bulletin greeting somebody saying welcome. How many
Exactly.
times do you do? How many times this happen? You go into church. How are you doing today? And everybody, what's the typical answer?
Fine.
Fine.
Thank you.
And reality is,
They're
we're not.
not.
Right? As a pastor, how many times I had fights on the way to church?
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I've had to tell my church, hey, we had a little stuff. I'm not going to hide it. We had a tough time this morning, but I'm going to give you my best, right? But the point being is, not everybody's fine that's walking in your door.
Yeah.
And so just having somebody that says, hey, it seems like you're a little down. Tell me about what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they will,
Yeah.
or maybe they won't open up. But the point being is it takes intentionality. Just like it takes intentionality to be intergenerational, it takes an intentionality to be family. It takes intentionality to build relationships beyond the programs.
Yeah. And I'm thinking disciples at the door, right?
Absolutely.
Disciple
Absolutely.
Disciples at the door, because you're right though, when you think about it, the people that are coming through the doors, you don't know what they're going through. And when they get in there, they just want to, somebody please, you know, just say, speak to me.
Right.
Speak to me, you know?
We're we are supposed to be Jesus with skin on. We are supposed to take that incarnational ministry and become Jesus ourselves to these folks, right? We have the Holy Spirit abiding in us. We need to let it go. We don't need to hang on to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you speaking into so many people's hearts. You spoke so much into mine today, and
Uh,
we've had such a great conversation. But so my question would be to what would you say to discouraged parents now?
mhm.
Because
Yeah.
they may be seeing, faith waning in their child or
Yeah.
their own faith
Yeah.
going in that direction.
That's a great question. I have of my three sons, I have a current prodigal son, right? It breaks my heart. It grieves me. I've had to learn things as I go along. He's my oldest son, but a lot of trauma. I would say this, and this is this really reminds me, number one, kids are going to have to come to a point where it's actually their faith, not your faith, right? So they may wander a little bit like the prodigal son. And if God's working in their heart, like did the heart of the prodigal son, they may come back. It may take 10, 15, 20 years, right? We don't know, but God knows the heart. And I also say it this way. We got to remember Adam and Eve had God as the perfect father, and they still rebelled.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
think about that. Like a lot of parents are guilt laden. It could be anything in their kids' life. I mean, issues like, for instance, we talked about maybe kids come out as homosexual or trans, or maybe they're walking away from their faith, or maybe they've been more secular. And parents go, what could I have done differently? Oh, what is my fault? No, you got to remember that your child is being influenced sometimes beyond your influence. I hate to say that, but I will say this. This is why parents have to disciple their children, the younger, the better, right? Because your child is going to be discipled to something. This is why, as a parent, look, it's never too late. Start somewhere. And if you know that your child is wandering, don't get preachy. Just go back to asking questions. Why do you feel this way? Help me understand. I'm still going to love you regardless, right? So, whatever the issue is your child's going through, just have humility, keep the communication doors open, and basically by saying, help me
Right.
understand. Can I?
Rich, where can they find out more about you and get your book?
Yeah, the books are either at d6family.com, D is in Delta or Deuteronomy, d6family.com, or they can go to Amazon and just look under Rich Griffith. There are other podcasts, yours too. The other way they can reach me is probably I'll give them my professional email, which is my college email, which is rwgriffith, Griffith, rwgriffith at TFC, as in Toccoa Falls College edu.
Wonderful. And you also said you had something else that a virtual uh
Yeah. So I'm more than willing, like I know churches sometimes have limited funding, or even an individual or a parent who wants to converse and stuff like that. I just want to equip churches, and I've done this before. I don't ask for money, right? My deal is people can meet with me virtually, like we're doing over line here.
what would you like to leave my audience with?
Well, keep listening to Nancy's program because she got a lot of great stuff on there. So just one, I feel always edified when I listen to you or engage with you. So I'm thankful for that. I think, again, don't give up, right? Paul talks about running the good race to its completion. So I just want to encourage parents, don't give up. Don't give up. Your kids need you more today, more than ever. And for churches, start becoming more like church as family.